Hey everyone, how are all of you doing? My name is Felix. I'm the co-founder here at ADPList, and I'm super excited to be hosting a bunch of amazing people from all around the world. So I'm super excited, and also today we have with us two very special guests from Slack. So a little bit about this to kickstart this today's session and today's virtual session with all of you. ADPList is partnering with Slack to create some incredible, amazing mentorship session on ADPList that could help all of you gain insights into Slack's design culture, the way they design things, some of the knowledge that each of the individual designer possesses themselves. So we have hosted Carl, who is today here with us today in the chat as an audience, and we have hosted Drew as well previously. Today we have two very special guests, Anna and Pedro, from two different places. I'll let them share a little bit more about themselves just in a bit. But I want to, spotlight them. So let me just put them in the spotlight. Yeah, literally. All right. So I will share a little bit more about the two of them, and obviously I'll pass the mic to the two of them today. So Anna is the Senior Director of Product Design and Slack. So Anna is a software designer based in New York City right now. She's currently spending her time at Slack for over the past 5 years, leading as an IC and coaching teams to ship some of the most amazing and biggest consumer-facing improvements and new product features. Now, she's going to share the behind of scenes for that today. So we'll pass the time to her later. And today as well, we have Pedro, who is the principal product designer at Slack. And if I'm not wrong, Pedro, you just recently got a promotion, right? Did this promotion. So congratulations to you. And so he's from Brazil. He's currently residing at Miami. Over the past 10 years, he has been designing the digital products for companies like Kickstarter, Envoy, Simple Bank, and Teespring. So amazing companies. And the past 3 years, he has been spending his time designing at Slack. So with that said, I will pass my time to the speaker. First of all, I'll pass my time to Anna. And if you guys want to continue the introduction, go for it. And if not, you can kickstart the presentation for today.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Felix. I'm going to share my screen really quick. Okay, like I said, as Felix said, I'm Anna. My pronouns are she, her. I'm super excited to be here today. Pedro, do you want to say hi?
Yeah, hi, I'm Pedro. I'm a principal product designer here at Slack. Pronouns he, him, his.
Sweet. Okay, so I'm going to kick it off just by sharing a little bit more about our team and our role here. Pedro and I work really closely together every day. And what we do is we work on Slack's virtual headquarters team. This is our logo right here. It's kind of a cheesy name, but the TLDR is it's like a small innovation team within Slack that is focused on new features and products, specifically for digital first, distributed, and hybrid teams. Our team is a perfect example. So I'm based in New York City. Pedro's in Miami. Matt, our other product designer, is based in San Francisco. And since this is a relatively new team at Slack that was kind of born out of the pandemic, the vast majority of the folks who we work with are pretty equally distributed across at least North America. And I know that a lot of you are joining from around the world today. That's super cool. I hope that some of these themes resonate with you. But I think that we've been working remotely for 2 years. That's not going to change. And I think that flexibility has been really life-changing for us. The ability to work where you want, the freedom to spend less time commuting, more time with your family and loved ones has had a really positive effect on my well-being and mental health. And I think that this is the future of work. And this is why we really built a team around it and why I'm excited to come to work every day. But I also kind of wanted to acknowledge that there was like a gigantic cultural and societal shift that took us to understand this. In design, we usually start with the user problem. And in March 2020, we had like pretty much the biggest one that you can imagine. And our team was really born from the struggle to adapt to a scary and a tragic situation of a global pandemic. So rewinding 2 years, millions of people had to adjust to the reality of working from home. And we all kind of realized that we took a lot for granted about office culture. Morning coffee and small talk over lunch really helped our teams bond and stay connected. the natural cues of things like body language and tone and expression, how people align more in meetings and conversations. And also for designers, things like whiteboarding sessions allowed us to bounce ideas off of each other and collaborate on those kind of complex topics. And at Slack, we were coping like everybody. And I think simultaneously, we were super aware that Slack had this very kind of unique opportunity to make this specific situation better for people. During the pandemic, people really relied on Slack more than ever to communicate and make decisions and feel connected to their colleagues. And so we felt a lot of urgency to help. And Slack's mission has always been to make people's lives simpler, more pleasant, and more productive. And if there was ever a time to double down on that promise, this was that time. And so one thing that kind of came out of our team was the launch of Slack huddles. These are lightweight audio rooms in Slack, sort of like a walkie-talkie for a channel. And the idea is for people to kind of feel close again, to be able to have quick, ad hoc, casual conversations in a less stuffy way than a scheduled video meeting. This is the fastest growing feature since the launch of Slack itself. And it's really exciting to see people finding it valuable. And we also launched Slack video and audio clips, which is really what I think we're going to talk about mostly today. Clips, to give you the TLDR, clips allow you to send audio, video, and screen share messages. They help you, quickly capture ideas, share your work, present your designs in a more personal way. And they're also transcribed, captioned, searchable, so they're really accessible and available to everyone on your team. And we're really proud of where it landed. But how we got there is kind of a crazy story. So we wanted to show you a little bit behind the scenes of how the sausage got made. And I'm going to pass it to Pedro actually to talk a little bit more about that journey.
Cool. So to begin telling that story, let's put our throwback Thursday cap on and rewind back to the year of 2020. I know that feels like yesterday, but that was actually 2 years ago, which is weird to say out loud. And as Anna mentioned, everyone was sort of coping with this new reality, and companies were quickly shipping features to capture that connection that we all once had and felt. The ever successful stories featured here on the top left, pioneered by Snapchat, was then sort of copied by Facebook's Instagram later on. It began to find itself in other tech companies and social products like Twitter and LinkedIn. In early 2020, we started seeing them ship that. And it was just simply a quick and easy way to create short temporary video updates in the feed. And the internet obviously had its laugh. Design Twitter especially had a laugh at all these companies, copying each other. But still, it's kind of easy to see why the format was heavily copied. A billion people already knew how the format worked. And making users not think and don't reinvent the wheel are actually two of our core product principles here at Slack. So we asked ourselves, where do we begin? Should we make Slack stories a thing? But no, literally, should we make Slack stories a thing? We did. For our team, time was the essence, as Anna sort of aforementioned. We didn't want to waste any time deciding where to begin or arguing about, how a new product could potentially work within Slack. By starting with the familiar stories concept, many of the product constraints were already defined by us, defined for us. It was honestly fun to geek out, design craft, coming up with mobile first prototypes, designing ways Slack could take a well-established idea and make it shine for Slack specifically. And besides, wouldn't it be nice to see each other in Slack? It could, potentially replace a lot of typed messages with something more human. It could skip those long synchronous Zoom calls that we're all feeling fatigued from. And it could, replace stand-ups or other repetitive update meetings. So within literally a few weeks, we shipped this brand new feature internally, giving everyone in the company the ability to share short ephemeral videos pinned to the top of the channel. And as you can see here, this is like really internal stuff that we never even showed the world. We iterated on the visual design a lot. We reconfigured this feature, how it would live in our information architecture, its relationship to channels and profiles. And honestly, we received a lot of constructive, valuable feedback from our coworkers. But and this is the big but, the feature didn't land well with our teammates. It wasn't quite self-explanatory how it would work within the work context. It was really hard to say what it was appropriate for. The ephemeral and disappearing nature of stories also meant that it didn't end up in the channel the way messages do. So they were super easy to miss. And it didn't seem the worth to go create a video, get all this presentation if they weren't going to stick around in Slack. So we also found that people felt a lot more pressure and to polish in their stories when they were in a work context. We got a lot of feedback like, my work from home setup is too messy. I say and like a lot, like I just did. Do I need to put my makeup on for this? All this valid feedback came to sort of our Slack DMs. And in the end, we decided that the mechanics of stories, while appealing it was in the social context, it wasn't fundamentally right for the workplace communication.
So yeah, we tried it. We like to say it felt cute, might delete later. But I think like I can sense the vibe in this Zoom meeting. And I think you might be asking like, okay, but like, why did you even try this in the first place? And I think that the way that this is actually a good example of like our product development culture, in that we kind of knew that stories would be a starting point. The way that we build products is very much kind of not waterfall. Waterfall development style is kind of a very linear process that goes from like idea to design to development to ship without much room for iteration in between. And at Slack, nearly every project, the very first prototype is very different from where we end up and what we ship to customers. And I think the reason for that is, you know, when you're using Slack, it's very alive, it's changing every second. And sometimes that is really hard to convey in, you know, a project brief or a static design mock. So we really learn a lot by actually using and trying our own products. And I think with that, we had some trust that it would evolve over time. And so this kind of goes back to one of our company principles. So this is it, it's called prototype the path. And it really helps us remember to just try things instead of talking about them, in addition to talking about them, I guess. And as Pedro said, you know, the problem was really urgent. We didn't want to waste time deciding where to begin. And tactically, that kind of means working really collaboratively with engineers to get designs in code as fast as possible in Slack so we can kind of evaluate and see how it works. Like Pedro said, the stories prototype was up and working in a matter of weeks. And we approached the idea of with optimism, kind of knowing that it would evolve, and it did. So we kind of chipped away at it. From our first experience with stories, we really kind of iterated gradually. We released revisions internally on an almost daily basis, listening to feedback from our peers and kind of tracking how different parts of the company used the video products that we were building. So these are some kind of like in-between screenshots and prototypes. So up here we have kind of like a more stories style video player where you can see like the different video clips and different people who have contributed to it. Here we're kind of dipping our toes into video messaging, but still kind of figuring out if we wanted to preserve something like stories. And then eventually we also started thinking about experimenting with topics like, you know, morning stand-ups or priorities to give a bit more structure to, you know, these video stories in a corporate setting. And then kind of eventually we really just narrowed in on like the core utility of video in the context of Slack. So we originally focused a lot on the capture and storytelling experience, but I think what we know people found valuable was mostly inline video and audio playback in the context of Slack. So we really listened to our colleagues who told us all about the different environments that they find themselves in and how their roles differ now that they're out of the office. And I think from that, we really learned that the magic sauce was quality, accessibility, inclusivity. And I think the things that we kind of considered, or that are considered to be accessibility features like transcripts and captions and playback speed, had really massive curb cut effects that were helpful for everybody. So if you're in a loud coffee shop and you can't play audio captions, or you can't play the audio, captions can help you get the full effect of that. If you're a really busy person with only a few minutes between meetings, you can quickly skim the transcript of the video instead of watching the whole thing. And if you prefer to kind of just listen to your colleagues with chipmunk voices, 2 times the speed is there for you. That's a personal favorite. And I think, what's great about all this is that it's in Slack, it's searchable, and it's archived, so you can always access it later.
I was on mute. Classic. As we refined this feature, we felt like we had something useful. We started getting, as Anna mentioned, the curb effects started happening. It felt like it was actually improving the way we worked and connected with one another, but we wanted to make sure our customers felt that way as well. So using our Slack Connect feature, like we've done in the past, we invited some of them to try it out. So this helped us find pain points, identify what value they were finding in this new product, and tweak issues as the feedback rolled in. And that's like kind of an important detail about how we work within Slack. At Slack, when you're building products, it's so easy to get caught up in the details because we are actually using the features we are building daily, dog fooding the product. So getting a fresh new perspective from how other people were using this feature taught us a lot, and it gave us a better overall picture of the impact of the product. And one of the biggest feedback themes that we were hearing was that as we got progressively better at the video and screen sharing message use case, we had neglected the audio messages use case. At the time, you could technically create an audio message by recording your video as the video entry point and turn your camera off. It worked, but it wasn't lightweight or intuitive, and the playback felt really large and clunky, as you saw in the big media player. And more importantly, it didn't really match the expectations that our customers had for audio messages based on what they used in other platforms. So we went back to the drawing board for that. Our research indicated that people who preferred audio messages over video or even text were primarily using them on the go. So speed and lightweight interaction in both the recording and the sending audio message was a major factor in the experience. So the demand existed already. We saw that from some of our most beloved international customers like India and Brazil, where I'm originally from, had been asking for audio messaging capabilities for Slack for a while now. And this niche and this feature specifically needed a clean slate. So as you can see here in these mock-ups, we separated out the entry points. Audio lived right next to video, so there were 2 distinct sort of modes of communicating. And on mobile, as you can see on the next screenshot, it lived as a top entry point. So designing a mobile first capture experience with detailed sound and haptic feedback interactions elevated the audio messages as a primary type of message within Slack. And also, of course, as you can see on the top right, we baked in some of those accessibility features from video that we learned, like transcripts, like playback speed, to make the experience more powerful and more flexible. So through the process of prototyping the path and developing clips in Slack, we obviously, as you can see, learned a lot. We learned a great deal. And as Slack has become sort of the virtual HQ office for us here at Slack, but many customers all around the world, we design these features intentionally to give people the flexibility to communicate in whatever way works for them. So video gives people the ability to be creative, expressive when sharing their work or connecting with other people. Folks on the go can record a quick audio clip rather than typing out a long message. Searchable transcripts and captions provide the utility for all sorts of people, from those with hearing impairments to those working in a coffee shop. we have so much more to do. And if you're not using flips, please start using them and then give us feedback. But we're already seeing the impact how these products have on our team. It's eliminating meetings for us. It's creating a more inclusive, flexible, and transparent communication patterns across the organization because things are searchable. And quite simply, it's helped everyone in the company feel more connected and more human again.
And that is the story of how Pedro and I and the amazing other Slack designers on the team designed and prototyped and shipped clips. Thanks for listening, and I'll kind of hand it back to you, Felix, for the Q&A. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anna and Pedro. Really enjoyed that, and hopefully everyone enjoyed as well. All right, so we're going to dive into Q&A, and we will be taking questions from all of you, the public audience. So Jessica will be sending out a pigeonhole. Yep. So there is a pigeonhole. All of you can put in your questions there, and we'll be going through. But to get started, I have some questions myself while listening to the both of you. So one of the questions that I actually wrote out was, what's quite interesting because, Anna and Pedro, you both showed about different references on stories on LinkedIn, Instagram, Snapchat. It's an amazing format, right? So stories sounds like an amazing format and feature, but I'm curious that it does seems like much more of a blue sky kind of like feature for something like Slack. Would you say that you started with like, oh, we just want to put in stories and then you work towards a problem, or was there a problem before that stories is trying to solve? Because it could go both ways, right? So I'm just curious as to, was there a problem that led to stories, or stories and then you try to find a problem around that?
I can take that. I think that we had a problem, but it was just so big and ambiguous, which was like, people are working remotely for the first time ever. And there were so many different ways that we could approach like solving that problem. We had an inkling that like video is a way, like figuring out the best way of the video would be a good add-on to like the Slack capabilities. But so it was like we had a problem and we thought this would be a good starting point to finding the right solution. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Anna. Pedro, you have anything else to add on that?
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly it. Like we saw Zoom usage skyrocket. We all did, right? Like in the beginning of the pandemic. And I think that was like the urge to feel connected and feel like, yeah, companies all over the place were like, oh shit, are we like still gonna get work done? And they were using Slack and Zoom heavily. We saw even internally usage go skyrocket up. So that was just like a response to that problem. How can we like feel connected and do more than just typed messages?
Got it. Thank you both so much. And this brings on to my next question, which is, it seems like an incredibly fast process. It also seems like a well thought process of innovating this feature around a particular bigger set of problem. Both of you have a combined experience of close to 3 decades of design. But if I could have both of you individually point to one single new thing that you have learned throughout this process as a designer, what do you think that would be?
Oh, good question.
Great question.
Take your time. Think.
I think I learned, I guess, that it's not about, I think like you watch things like Mad Men, or you watch TED Talks and stuff, and you think you have to be the person that comes up with like this brilliant idea and have this great career in design. And I think that to me, I found a lot of like value in that project and in that process, really focusing on the craft and design and like approaching every idea with optimism and giving it my all. So even if I wasn't, totally into stories as a concept, I wanted to, make it the best that it could possibly be, because if the design is the best that it can possibly be and it's still not valuable, then you know that you have to iterate on the concept or the product idea a little bit more. So I think I just adopted a more kind of like flexible mindset about like ideation and iteration throughout the project.
Thanks for sharing that, Hannah.
For me, I think yeah, that's really great, Anna. We talked a little bit about that as well as we were prepping for this talk. I think for me is maybe something that I already knew, but I never really experienced in a full-fledged manner, is how like trust, like having a team that everyone trusts each other to do their best work. Really sort of enables people to do their best work. I think just exactly what Anna just mentioned, designing stories, us all knowing that, it wasn't right, like quite there, the product, but trusting that like we were going to get the valuable feedback and trusting that we were going to one day squiggle our way into the final solution that was going to be good. Like it definitely did not at the beginning. Like you mentioned, it felt like you guys knew what you were doing and iterated. Like the beginning, we were like, what the hell are we doing? Like we did not know. But there was a lot of internal trust, right? To believe that we were going to get to something that was useful for us and for our customers. So I think that enabled us to do really good work.
Thank you. Thank you both so much for sharing that. And we can resonate a lot as well, especially when we are trying new things out. It's a lot of unlearning and relearning. So thank you for sharing that. So I will now bring attention to the questions from the public. Actually, there's been 12 questions so far and a bunch of votes. So we're going to start off with the one that is most popular. It's by anonymous, so 5 votes. When did you decide to roll out the stories? What did the research prior to that internal test rollout look like? So about the research process for these stories before the internal test.
Do you want to take that?
We had a bunch of research internally, like I mentioned with the audio messages. Like we had endless internal tickets saying like, we want audio messages in Slack and we want video messages in Slack. But I think like in terms of the second part of the question, what did research prior internal test rollout look like? I don't think we had like specifically around stories as a feature. As we mentioned, like stories felt like the good starting point, the concept that people knew, and we could sort of iterate and learn from there. So around stories specifically, we didn't have any like research, but we had a lot of research from folks wanting to express themselves in Slack other than typed messages. So it was something that was a long time coming for Slack. And I think the sort of the remote pandemic situation sort of expounded that for us to really push on that and do it.
Yeah, something that I feel is important is to like do research on things that you as a designer feel confident in, and use that. Like you should put the best thing that you have in there, or out into the world. And so we did usability testing on some really early versions of video messages. That was kind of in parallel with we were testing with a cohort of pilot customers. So those are people who have opted in to get really early versions of features that we're working on, and they kind of understand that it's new, it's not totally perfect yet. And so I think the combination of like usability testing with our research team, as well as the kind of pilot customer feedback, helped us make more informed decisions and kind of refine it into like the simplest possible solution.
Thank you both for sharing that. And I'm just curious, just to this is not part of the question, but I'm just curious from a designer point of view as well. Are there times where things are just pretty obvious and intuitive to you as designers that you sort of just skip part of the research? Because it does happen to me. I'll be the first to admit that when I was working at my previous startup, there are certain things that were just so obvious as a designer, because you're talking to your users every day and you kind of sort of like skip that process. Does that happen to both of you? Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I always like to put things in front of users that I believe in and I want to be proven wrong.
Yep.
I also think it's like a really good kind of, if there's a tricky decision that people on the team disagree about, putting it in front of the users is a really great way to like break an argument. So I think those are like a couple kind of tactics I use to help like get to the best design solution. But yeah, I think like designers have good judgment, and you should use that judgment and then, you know, put it in front of users to make sure that it's right.
Thanks for sharing that, Anna. All right, so let's move on to the next question. 7 votes by Julie. Julie, are you here? Maybe we could turn this up a little bit, and Julie, if you want to raise your hand, you could unmute yourself. Okay, I don't think she's here. I will just read off a question. So this is a question by Julie. Are there features that you really fought for that didn't make it to the production? What was it, and what were the trade-offs?
Such a good question.
It's a really great question. I mean, everything kind of released gradually after, I think. But one thing that comes to mind is backgrounds. Backgrounds for video clips. Like right now, I don't have my background because I'm comfortable with y'all seeing my background. But some folks aren't because of their working environment. And we didn't quite make that for GA, but it was a fast follow release. But it was certainly something that we tried to fight for a lot, just for technical reasons. It was actually way more complex than it sounds like, just slapping a PNG on your background and then going with your video. So yeah, that's one that comes to mind that didn't make the GA.
Yeah, I would say something similar, which is really simple, like trimming and clipping. I think say a lot, or you want to redo a little part of your video without redoing the whole thing. That's something I would like, I think would be really valuable.
Thank you both for sharing that. It sounds a lot like, there's always a lot of disagree and commits in team. And I think that's what we, do on a daily basis. All right. Thank you so much, Julie, for that amazing question. So let's move on to the next most popular question. Let me just mark this as answered. So this is a question by Daniel McGill. How would you make sure the users you tested with accurately reflected the different environments that users might work in? For example, home, coffee shop, etc. Or were you able to see this while testing internally?
I can share like a funny anecdote to this, and then maybe Anna, you can answer this seriously. When we shipped stories, no pressure. We shipped stories in TS. We obviously we tracked usage. So we could see how many people were creating stories within Slack, how many people were watching them, etc. And the first cohort that we shipped internally, we saw that our sales side of the organization loved this. They were constantly posting their wins, posting these big, funny, hilarious edited videos and all this jazz. But we saw, we clearly learned that they're very extroverted people. They're comfortable with being on video. They just kind of, that's their thing. They pump up the jams. But we work at a really large company, thankfully. So we were quickly able to see that this doesn't work for all types of people that, are comfortable with putting their video on or speaking. So we learned very quickly that the stories format, it helped people who were extroverts and who were already used to doing that in different contexts.
Yeah, and I would also say in terms of different environments and just making sure that we are getting outside perspectives from our own company. We did this really cool thing called, our research team did this cool thing called the diary study, where they followed different people who were kind of working remotely for the first time, and they kind of those participants wrote in a diary about how they were feeling or how they were working. And so we had these kind of research stories that helped us inform the different types of things that we should design and accommodate for.
Thank you, Anna and Pedro. So let's move on to the next question. I know that we do have a lot of questions, but we have about 5 minutes, so we will be going through. So the next question is by Mitch. How does the virtual HQ team decide what to work on next? And does design have input into that road mapping process? I think this is an extremely great question, especially given that there's many ways that designers are part of the road mapping success process. So Anna, Pedro.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll share like one little way that it is, and then maybe Anna, you can share you can share more like holistically. But we've talked about this in different contexts online. If you follow like slack.design or any of us on Twitter, but we do this thing called customer love sprint, which is a really great way for not only designers but anyone in the company to have an input on the roadmap. So we do this as well in virtual HQ team. We actually have one in I think a month from now. And it's a great way for you to highlight like, hey, we should really work on this like little tiny detail UI, or this like feature needs love, or this, brand new thing needs love. So it's a great way for everyone to pitch in, and specifically designers kind of shine in our customer live sprints, because you can like bang out like 4, 5, 6 different flows, and that engineer will sort of pick it up during the customer love sprint. So it's a great way for you to contribute in small ways, but in bigger products.
Yeah, and I think in terms of the road mapping process, I do a lot of time thinking about planning and road mapping. In terms of how we think about what we work on, I kind of like to think about it in terms of like balancing your portfolio. So each quarter, I think we try to make room for like 20% what we call bigger, bolder bets. And those are experimental things that we don't have a ton of conviction on, but that we want to try, kind of like the stories things. We also carve out a little bit of time for improvements on existing features like huddles or clips. And then we also carve out time for those itty bitty little like customer loves things, those little details that I think make the experience not just good, but great. And so those are kind of how we think about balancing all of the things that we work on. And designers definitely have a role in a lot of that planning process.
Thank you, Anna and Pedro, for sharing that. And actually, I just want to share a quick story. And, it does remind me a lot of, Ethan, who is the VP of design at Slack, that we work closely with for this partnership. And in fact, this partnership came so fast, within 2 weeks, and Ethan was like, let's go. And it speaks a lot about the culture of this design team. And I just appreciate all that all of you are doing, including the experimentation, how fast everything moves from the leader to everyone. It just speaks, so loud about the team. So thank you for giving us a perspective on that. So I actually saw a very interesting question by Matt from Open Door. I believe he asked a question regarding prototyping. Yeah. So it has two words, but I thought it was quite an interesting question. So Mark from Open Door, he mentioned, how should I go about persuading my team to adopt interactive prototyping? Yeah, he's saying hi. So you want to unmute yourself, Mark? Let me just.
Yeah. Hey, Anna. Hey, Pedro. Huge fan.
All right. Thank you. Yeah.
How do I go about persuading my team to adopt interactive prototyping? I would say find an engineer that can be your buddy. I think like when you have like a really good relationship with an engineer that's like a little bit design minded and like kind of eager to try things, it's just like a magical experience and it feels so awesome. And I think that's also a really great way to like prove a certain process kind of like through your work. That's one way. That's the way that it's worked well for me.
Yeah, totally. I agree. I think there's that micro level. I think folks maybe don't understand this, but engineers are just like us and designers. Like in design, like you have a project, you have tasks that you got to do, but then like you probably spend like 10-15% of that time just like tweaking that task, moving things around and like redoing it 3 or 4 times just because you like really nerd out about the details. Engineers like do that as well. So if you create that really good relationship, like you could do that together and sort of synchronously, which is like a really great relationship that you can build on with your engineer. but I think like organizationally, you should have that backing as well. So like talking to your head of design, and that head of design talking to the head of engineering, like there should be an alignment across the organization, because if you're fighting an uphill battle, then it's like you're probably going to lose. So just like surfacing that up back to the head of design is a great way to do it too.
Thank you, Mark. I hope that answered your question. All right, so we are down to the last two questions, and if there's any unanswered question, we don't worry about it. We will be sending the questions to Anna and Pedro for them to answer at their own time, and we will also be sharing out the recording. All right, so we have next question, which is, what metrics do you measure to determine if a particular iteration has been is successful?
What metrics? So we kind of measure all the classic metrics like usage. We measure kind of different creator versus consumption metrics. We, look at the length of time. We look at how viral it is. Like if someone kind of starts recording videos, do other people kind of in their sphere also start recording videos? I think like something that is kind of interesting about Slack is that it's much more qualitatively driven in terms of how we make decisions than it is quantitative. So on our team, we don't run like A/B tests. Our expansion team does, and some other teams on Slack do. But it's kind of like, does someone sending more Slack messages mean that they're more productive at work? Not necessarily. It might be. It might not be. But it isn't kind of a black and white. You can't really make an assumption about that. And so I think that we really do kind of have metrics as a baseline to understand, making sure that we're not like completely screwing up, but we really do take it to the next level to make sure that like our decisions are informed, not just by numbers, but by, the way that people are feeling and experiencing the product.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. So I have one last question, which is quite related to this, and then we'll be wrapping up. So, there is a lot of designers here that are moving into their career, and they're upgrading themselves. They're constantly learning. They're here today. They're showing up. So I'd love for both of you to share one piece of advice that that in a way no one would sort of like agree with you, but you would still hold true to this piece of advice that you'll give to someone. So it means there's something very dear to you that you'd like to share with the audience that keeps you through your career up to today as a designer.
No one would agree with you is the tricky
Like
part.
Unpopular opinion.
Hypothetically, yeah, hypothetically.
Hot takes.
I have one, and it's actually something that Pedro said like 3 years ago that I think about a lot, and I never told him this, but I remember like being in a meeting with Pedro, and we were talking about whether or not we should be, it was something about like OKRs, and we were talking about like what's the the most important role for a designer, and he goes, designers design, and I was like, yeah, designers design. And I think like what we were thinking of was like, there's so many things that designers are responsible for right now. It's like problem definition, ideation, a lot of, it's just like, or like process and running sprints. And those are all awesome. But I also think that like, it's important not to lose sight of like creating really beautiful, delightful, wonderful designs. And that's like what gets me so excited about being a designer. And so I don't know how unpopular that is. It's not that I don't think the other things are important, but that's my belief.
Dang it, you stole mine. Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing, like kind of similar, like just care about the craft, like put away all the like process stuff, like all that stuff. Well, I will say one thing that's kind of related to that, especially for, early designers that are getting in. I did this in the beginning of my career. I was a front end, like I got into the design being a front end engineer. And I got really caught up on like what was the latest. language and like was really into SAS at the time it was like CSS, and then SAS took over, and then like jQuery was dying, and then like there's like I was really caught up with like what's the new hot thing that everyone's using, and like was quickly moved over to Sketch from Photoshop, and like was quickly on board with Figma, et cetera. And I think like those are all fine, but like getting caught up in what the industry like is telling, like what is the best new thing, is a real waste of time versus, you know, getting really good at building product intuition and getting really good at building your craft, as Anna mentioned. So I think that's like way more important than like being a tool specialist, because those fade in companies. I've seen Slack, I've seen at other companies, those people who like are homegrown at like, I'm the tool specialist. They're not the ones picked to work on the most important products at the company. So it's my hot take.
Thank you. Thank you for the hot take. And Anna and Pedro, it's so obvious that when we work together, that chemistry, I love it. And to sum it up, you know, designers continue designing, and as Pedro said, you know, don't just follow trends, don't just follow what's out there. You know, do what's right as a designer for what you're building. So thank you all so much, and specifically thank you to Anna and Pedro for spending your evening with all of us here. And you know, there is a party happening in San Francisco for all ADPList mentors and members. So if you're here, drop by the Ferry Building. But thank you, Anna and Pedro, so much, and I hope to see both of you again very soon after this session. Thank you, and thank you all very much for coming.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Okay.